Before I begin, this year should be a merit for the health and success of the families of Regina Bas Yosef Reuven and Yeshaya ben Yisrael, and Benjamin Wolf ben Tzvi Hirsch and Baruch ben Benjamin Wolf. Yeah. Now, last week, I had mentioned the concept of the month of Cheshvan, and I went into it, why. But Cheshvan is really, I mentioned then, is a messianic month. That's what I said last week. So what is interesting, and I also mentioned that on the Cheshvan, Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, which means the first day of the month, there was a solar eclipse, which is really a very good sign, especially when it comes in a messianic month, and so on. So I mentioned that it looks very good for the Jewish people. Now, what happened was something happened which I think is very significant, and that is the Israeli elections. Now, for those who don't know what the results were, basically, the Likud under Bibi Netanyahu won 32 seats. Okay. Now remember, they need 61 to form a government or a coalition. And Ben Gvir and Smotrich, which is the religious right, they won 14. I think Shas won 11. And the Torah Judaism, United Torah Judaism, I think won 7 or 8. But what that means is that the government, just with the Likud and the religious right, can now form a government of approximately 64 seats. Now that is an incredibly significant idea. In fact, it's almost messianic. Why? It's not that Bibi Netanyahu came back, and that itself has very interesting implications. But they are able to make a government without the addition of any of the parties which are progressive or really left. And those are the Erev, which I will talk about. They actually now have a government without any opposition to Torah. And what's important is Netanyahu will follow, the religious right, because he only has 32 seats. And the other parties have, all combined, they have, I think, also 32, you see. So their parties together is equal to the Likud, which gives them enormous power, because without them, there's no coalition. And therefore, Netanyahu does not become the prime minister. Now, you have to remember one thing. Netanyahu really has been resurrected from the dead, because had he not won, in other words, the former coalition, then I believe the Likud would have dumped him. They would have got rid of him, because this would be the 5th time in 4 years, right, that he failed to put together a government. So they would have probably gotten rid of him and chosen somebody else, because the reason why he's having such a hard time putting a coalition together is because there are many people that hate Netanyahu. So therefore, you have to get rid of him, because he's already failed 5 times. But what happened was he won, and he put a coalition. So therefore, he has been resurrected from the dead. This is his chance to again be prime minister. And therefore, he is in many ways completely beholden, right, to the religious right. So there's no question that he will really accede to the demands of the religious right, which is tremendous for Torah in Israel, right? They will get rid of all the decrees against so many things, because the government before that under Lapid was completely left. It had all the parties which were progressive left and really anti-Torah. And therefore, what will happen is that now that the religious right, and Netanyahu can now form a government without them, the Erev Rav, this is remarkable news. In fact, I think it's the first time in Israeli history that you now can have a government completely that will accede to the requirements of the religious right. Because as I mentioned, Netanyahu will do what the religious right wants, and therefore it will be a tremendous time of Torah in Eretz Israel. And that's the first time, as far as I know, and that is messianic. And I believe it's because of Cheshvan is a messianic month, and there was a solar eclipse. It's a very important concept, you see. So that is tremendous news. Besides that, there's something else that happened a little while back, and that is that Twitter was bought by Elon Musk. Now, what that really means is that Twitter will now break the conspiracy of the social media, because the power behind the Democratic Party to do their evil is because the media or social media supports them. They conceal everything that these people do, which is terrible, right? They do not report on any of it. In fact, journalism is basically dead in America. It's all a propaganda machine, right, for the Democratic Party. So therefore, when he bought Twitter, he is now going to open up Twitter to anything, basically, you see. So he's going to remove the censorship, which is the beginning of the end of the ability of social media like Facebook and others, right, to conceal the MS. So that also is very important. So that's a second major event, you see, that will contribute to destroying the left. Now, this year is being given on November 8th, or I should say November 7th, and tomorrow, November 8th, is the elections in America. Hopefully what will happen is the third event, where the Democratic Party will be destroyed or severely weakened, you see. And the Congress, which is the Senate and the House, will become Republican and begin to restore America, to a land of that makes sense and more morally righteous instead of what's happening in America, and so on. And that will be the third thing that happens, basically, in Cheshvan. So these ideas, Musk buying Twitter, and the religious right, together with Netanyahu now governing Israel, and also American elections, is three very significant events, basically all happening in Cheshvan. So what we're witnessing in many ways, hopefully for good, is the end of the dominion or the domination of the Erev Rav. If you recall, I said that a lot of this is God has given permission to satisfy justice to evil to dominate. It's been dominating all over the world. But the fact that the Erev Rav in Israel has lost their dominion, because now they don't even need, or the government does not even need Lieberman, very evil person. It doesn't need Meretz. And Meretz, I hear, is not even in the government. They got less than the threshold of seats in the Knesset, and so on, He doesn't even need them. So we have witnessed the end of the dominion of the Erev Rav, and that basically is messianic. Now, I also believe, it's very possible, that one of the reasons why Netanyahu won is because Iran is afraid of Netanyahu, because they know it's one thing that they can fool around with Lapid, because Lapid fundamentally is a moron. However, they know they cannot do this with Netanyahu. He's very strict, very strong, you see, and therefore it may mean that this year there will be a real confrontation between Iran and Israel, you see, and therefore what Rabbi has done is put an individual who will be able to overcome, confront, and destroy Iran. It's a very big possibility. In any case, this is what we see happen. So that is tremendous news. Hopefully, on Tuesday, November 8th, the same thing will happen with the Democratic Party, with the evil of Esav, because that's what America is, right? The Democratic Party, the liberals, the progressives, and so on, Biden and company, that they will be completely neutralized. Well, let's see what happens tomorrow. In any case, I wanted to speak, therefore, I mentioned this is very good news because it's the end of the dominion of the Erev Rav. And the Erev Rav, as I want to show you, is really the last klipa, is the last vestige of evil. So I wanted to explain that. The question is the Erev Rav, which means a mixed multitude, right? That's what an Erev Rav means. Those are the people that left Egypt with the Jews. They were basically Egyptians that converted, and they left with the Jews. And the Erev Rav is the one that sinned with the golden calf. They're the ones who did it. In any case, what does that mean, the Erev Rav? Well, what is important to know is the Satan, of course, is always trying to get the Jews punished, you see. And he has various means of doing that. Now, the origin of the Erev Rav is they make very good loyalty soldiers for the Satan, the Erev Rav. Now, the Erev Rav today is basically who? The Erev Rav are Jews that attack and try to negate the agreement between God and the Jewish people. That's the essence of the Erev Rav. As it says in Tanakh, right, that your enemy will come from within. Your enemy is the Erev Rav. They come from within the Jewish people, and they are our enemy. And the essential battle that the Erev Rav tries is they are Jews that try to negate, as they said, to try to negate the agreement between God and the Jewish people, the covenant, the contract, that the Jewish people will observe the mitzvahs and do the tikkun, the rectification, and God will give them Eretz Israel, which really means he will give them Olam Haba, the future world, for eternity. That is the agreement which God made with Avraham Avinu, you see. And that agreement is not a simple agreement. It allows the Jews to do the tikkun, and it allows the Jews to rectify creation. Very important, you see. And that is the entire purpose of creation, you see. And like I said, with that, the Jews can now inherit the future world. So we're looking at an existential reward for the observance of Torah, which is basically to observe the Taryag mitzvahs, 613 commandments, and thereby repair, rectify creation. In fact, that's what allows the Jews to survive, is because we are the ones that do the tikkun. However, once there are ways that the Satan somehow can convince the Jews to sin. And one of the grievous ways, we think, well, the Satan, of course, has a role called the Yetzer Hara, right? The Yetzer Hara is the tempter, right? Tries to tempt a Jew to sin. But what's a much greater enemy is the Erev Rav. Because it's one thing if a Jew sins. You say, okay, he does mitzvahs, but he can sin, he can be tempted, right, and commit a sin. We understand that, you see. But it's another thing when the Jew not only sins, but the Jew tries to destroy the agreement itself between God and the Jewish people. That's an entirely different level, you see, of betrayal and sin. That's what an Erev Rav is. It's an attempt not just to get a Jew to sin, but to destroy the very fabric of the agreement between the Jew and God. It's a different type of enemy. Really, it's an existential enemy where they seek to destroy the whole rationale of existence of the Jew. And that's important to remember. I mean, it's one thing to have Jews sin, which happens obviously all the time, and so on. But at least they are in conformity to the agreement, basic agreement, the covenant between the Jew and God, right? But it's another thing to have a person that negates the entire agreement or covenant with God. So that's an attack on the fundamental structure of the whole Jewish experience. It's a whole different type of enemy. That's the Erev Rav. That's what he does. Therefore, the Erev Rav, right, is the most dangerous enemy of God, the most dangerous enemy of the Jewish people. And I'm going to explain why. You see, you have to have an appreciation. There's a difference in the enemies of the Jew, So therefore, it says in the Chumash Bereshis, when Yaakov, right, leaves the house of Lavan, and he's now going to go to Eretz Yisrael, and Esav is coming to meet him, right, with 400 people, basically to kill him, because he stole the blessings. So Yaakov Aminu says something very interesting. He says, Hatzileni no, please save me, miyad ochi, from the hands of my brother, miyad Esav, from the hands of Esav. Obviously, who is my brother? So we can ask, wait a minute, obviously we know that Esav is his brother, so why does he say from the hands of my brother and from the hands of Esav? That is the question. What Yaakov was hinting at is a critical lesson in understanding of who the enemy of the Jew is. Save me when Esav comes to me as my brother, you see, in order to convince me to do what? Not only to sin, but to abandon the agreement or the covenant between myself and God. When he comes as my brother. Now, what does that mean? That means he comes disguised as my brother. Who now, brother doesn't mean in any way to harm a brother. So what happens is he is evil, Esav is evil, but he comes as somebody who pretends that he wants to benefit, that he means only good for his brother. Therefore, the evil of Esav as a brother is a disguise. It's a masquerade, you see. And the problem is that when Esav comes as that, in that form, where he appears to Yaakov, well, I'm your brother, and I love you, but follow me, right? Is that a brother has what's called credibility, right? Because a brother is not seen as an enemy, even if what the advice that he's offering is destructive, you see. That is the danger when Esav appears as a Jew, as somebody who loves his fellow brother, but his advice, of course, is to abandon the agreement. He has credibility, and that's what makes him so dangerous. When you think about that, that is really the worst type of enemy. Somebody that disguises his evil and makes believe, or he pretends, right, that he loves his brother, and his advice is only beneficial. In many ways, we could compare the Erev Rav, and that's what the Erev Rav is. They come to you as a fellow Jew, as your brother, and they try to convince you to abandon the covenant. What disease is like that? Well, think about it. Cancer, a tumor, right? One of the reasons why cancer or a tumor, right, is so harmful is because the body does not recognize it as an enemy. Because basically a tumor, right, is cells that have gone wild. They keep proliferating, you see. So the body does not recognize it as an enemy. Meanwhile, the cancer, as a tumor, is killing or usurping all the nutrients of the body. In fact, that's how cancer kills, you see. But the fact that the body doesn't see it as an enemy, right, therefore it does nothing. And that is how cancer is able to kill a person. Because the body does not see it as an enemy. It sees it as an intrusion. It sees it as what? As self, and therefore it does nothing. Meanwhile, the cancer grows, becomes malignant, it proliferates, and it usurps all the nutrients that the body needs, and basically the body starves for nutrients. That's how cancer is able to do it. In other words, cancer is where the body has credibility, right? See, I'm really you. I don't mean to harm you. And the body is fooled into thinking that the tumor is a friendly growth. That's what the Erev Rav really is. The Erev Rav is a tumor, you see, on the body of the Jew. The problem is that since he appears as a brother, right, then the Jews don't recognize him as an enemy, and that his advice is to destroy them. So therefore, cancer, right, tumor, is really the equivalent analog, right, of an Erev Rav. So that's what Yaakov Avinu says. You know, save me from my brother. In other words, when Esav comes as my brother, and then he's an Erev Rav, right? And Miyad Esav, save me when he comes as Esav, which is a very visible enemy, you see. And that's why Yaakov said that. Save me from Esav, no matter what form he comes. A very important concept. And that's what the Erev Rav really is. In other words, the Erev Rav are Jews. And therefore, as such, they have tremendous credibility. And they're not viewed as enemies, you see. So what they want to destroy is the essential relationship that the Jew has with God. And that is a covenant, an agreement, a contract, right? That we will do his will through the Taryag Mitzvahs, through the 613 commandments, right? And if we do his will, he will give us Olam Haba, the future world. That's the agreement, you see? And therefore we will get eternal existence in a blessed state. That's what the Erev Rav is. It's far more than a group of people that sin. They want to destroy the essential concept, the agreement between the Jew and God. Now, what are some of the strategies of the Erev Rav? It's interesting to watch. How do they go about doing this? How do they go about, separating the Jew from his covenant? Well, there are different ways, and I'll point out some of them. But they're all Erev Rav, no matter what strategy they employ. Well, one, they can actually negate openly the covenant and just say, listen, we don't believe that there is an agreement, right? We don't believe at all that God made an agreement with Avram Avinu, or that there is an agreement with the Jewish people. They just openly defy that belief. So that's one, right? A second strategy is that they say, well, it's true that the Jewish people are one. And they try to demonstrate that we have a commonality, not the Torah or the agreement with God, you see. First of all, the nation. We have the same heritage. We are all descended from who? From Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. So they all agree that we are really a nation. We have a commonality, that we are descended, right, from common ovus, the patriarchs and the matriarchs, right, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and so on, right? So they agree to that, and that's really what defines us. That the essence of the Jew is that we are a nation, but like all other nations, you see, what is unique about the Jew is not the agreement he made with God, but that we are a nation like everybody else, you see. The second idea, they say, is we are a nation not only because we derive from a common ancestry, right, but we have a common culture, you see. We have, ideas, we have laws, right? And there is a culture, which is common to all Jews, and so on. So it is culture that defines the identity of the Jewish people, not the covenant with God. You see, another idea, another strategy of the Erev Rav, right, is that we basically are all Israelis, right? The whole concept of the Zionist movement, right, was to replace the Torah with the land of Israel. You see, we are Israelis, right? That's what makes us a nation, not the Torah. And that was a common concept. That's really what Zionism was when it was founded by Herzl and so on. Is that what unites us is that we now have a land, you see, like other nations. And that's what makes us a unique Jewish people. In fact, Shimon Peres brought it even further. He said what makes us as a nation is that we are Middle East citizens, right? We live in a common region of the world, the Middle East, and that's what we are. He didn't even say that we're all Israelis, you see. But what they're essentially trying to do is replace, again, the covenant, the agreement between Jew and God with the fact that we have the land of Israel, you see. Now, another way they try to, identify the Jewish people is that we have a common history, you see. All of this is to emphasize that we are a nation, but it has nothing to do, right, with God, spirituality, and the whole concept of the ovus and the agreement with God, you see. Now, so that's a second type of strategy, that we are a nation because we have a lot of commonalities, and I mentioned a whole bunch of them. A third strategy, and this was the strategy of Korach. Korach said to Moshe Rabbeinu, right, what he said was that, yeah, of course, God gave the Torah. But there are certain aspects of the Torah, Korach said, that I believe God did not say, and it's from your heart. You see, he accused Moshe of making up some of the Torah. It's not all from God, because you added ideas of your own, right, thinking. So what Korach tried to do is to destroy the authority of the Torah by saying that Moshe, some of the ideas or the mitzvahs of the Torah is really ideas from Moshe Rabbeinu and not from God. So as such, he tried to destroy the fundamental authority or authenticity of the Torah as being written and given by God. Well, that's another Erev Rav, because again, he's trying to destroy the covenant by introducing the concept that some part of the Torah is not from God, It's a Moshe Rabbeinu. But the same concept, to damage the covenant. Then you have, throughout history, other Erev Ravs, like the Karaites. The Karaites said, well, all we have to do is observe is the Torah, right? But we don't have to observe any of the rabbinical enactments or decrees, the Gzeros, the Takonos of the D'Rabbanan. No, what does that have to do with the Torah? So what they try to remove and negate is all the rabbinical expansions, right? Which the Torah clearly says that God wants the rabbis to uphold his laws and to issue decrees to protect the observance of his laws. But the Karaites held, no, you don't need any of the rabbinical expansions, decrees, or enactments. You just have to observe the Torah. You see? So, well, you would think that what they try to do is negate the Torah, which they didn't do, but they negated all the Chazal, all the rabbinical enactments and decrees. So that's another wedge into the destruction of the agreement between God and Jew. Well, we now live in the 20th century, but there's a group of people, right? They hold that the Torah is flexible, that the Torah can be modernized. For instance, if you live far from shul, then you're allowed to drive on Shabbos to the shul. You see, they believe that the Torah has built in a tremendous flexibility and can be changed, especially when modern day necessities, right, impinge on a Jew's life. And that's the Reformed and the conservative movement, you see. They believe that the covenant of God allows flexibility. So again, all of these things are subtle ways, you see, that you can introduce change and therefore negate the Torah itself as the agreement between the Jew and God. They're all Erev Rav. Now, what's important to understand is that an Erev Rav is not a sinner merely. There are sinners and leaders. You see, the Erev Rav are Jews that are leaders of entire groups of people. So that's the first distinguishing element or identity of an Erev Rav. The second thing is that it's always an attack on the Torah to diminish, right, the sanctity, the authenticity, and the authority of the Torah, right, to negate or remove the fact that God made a covenant with the Jews. They just employ different strategies. That's an Erev Rav, you see. But any person who sins, that's not an Erev Rav. That's merely a person who sinned. That's not called an Erev Rav. So that's a very important distinction, you see. Now, what's very important, you see, is the concept. Why are the Erev Rav such a favorite, group of individual for the Satan? Well, there are certain ideas. You see, the first one is that the Erev Rav are Jews. They're not Goyim. So like I said, they have tremendous credibility. So therefore, it's very easy for them to infiltrate in the Jewish people, you see, and have them reject the Torah. The second reason why the Erev Rav, right, is such a favorite of the Satan is because as Jews, they do have merits. Schusim. Everybody has done something which is good, even the Erev Rav. So the fact that they have merits, you see, allows them to remain, they have a merit, so it allows them to remain in power because of their schus. In fact, we see that is true. For instance, one of the things that Yaakov, why was he so afraid to meet Esav? And the answer is, even though Esav was really totally evil, because Esav was tremendous in kibbud over aim, to honor your father and mother. In fact, that the Chazal say that in all the generations, he was the greatest person who honored his father, Esav. It says that, in fact, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that in my generation, I was the greatest person who honored my father. It's interesting. But I find that Esav, right, was greater than me. Esav, before he would go in to see his father, right, Yitzchak, he would change his garments into, big day Yom Tov or big day Shabbos garments, garments that you wear to some type of ceremony. He would actually change it and go in to see his father. That's an incredible, so you can imagine what Esav was in terms of, honoring his father. And so that's the problem. What Yaakov was afraid of is that Esav had a tremendous merit, and that in honoring father and mother. And Yaakov did not come to the kibbud over aim of Esav. In fact, one of the things that bothered Yaakov Avinu was what? Is that he was gone for 22 years, right? When he was in the house of Lavan. And therefore, he did not honor his father, serve him for 22 years. Whereas Esav did. So Yaakov was afraid that the merit of Esav would enable Esav to destroy Yaakov Avinu. Isn't that absolutely amazing? Yeah. And that's the Erev Rav. They have schusim. They have merits. Because nobody is a complete sinner, right? So their merits, a person has to be afraid of their merits, which can protect them and enable them to harm other Jews. This is the problem. And therefore, the Erev Rav are a unique type of enemy, and that's why the Satan loves to employ them for his benefit, to dissuade the Jews to abandon their Torah. And not only that, the Erev Rav, they're easily tempted, because remember, it's not that they sin only. It's the problem with the Erev Rav is they want to uproot the entire foundation of the agreement between the Jews and God. And therefore they're much greatly, easily tempted to sin, you see. There's another idea, that because they're Jews, whenever they do a mitzvah, they bring down nitzitze kedusha, sparks of holiness, because that's the power of a Jew. So when they sin, the Satan can nourish from their sparks. He can't do that if a goy sins, but he can do that with the Erev Rav. So that's why they're so valuable. In fact, that's one of the reasons why when the Satan is dying, as you get closer to a redemption, you see, that he's dying because he doesn't have any sparks. It's all gone back to the Jews because they've suffered in the exile, you see, and they did tshuva, so it goes back to the Jews. So where's he going to get new sparks of holiness? And the answer is the Erev Rav. He's able to take their sparks that they've done, you see, and nourish Yoinek from it, you see, because they're Jews, and whenever they do a mitzvah, they bring down sparks. And the Satan is able to take it from them. So the Erev Rav becomes a favorite tool, soldiers of the Satan, especially before the redemption. That's when he really needs them, because he's running out of sparks of holiness, you see. At the end of time, he becomes depleted of these sparks, and therefore he uses the Erev Rav to try to persuade, to take their sparks, and hopefully he can get them, because they have tremendous credibility, right? He's able to get them to actually convince other Jews. In fact, that's one of the things that he did, you see. If you recall, I once gave a shiur where I said, right, that the Satan is really dying. That is why you find such incredible opposition. It's almost psychotic. Tremendous opposition to Trump, which I've said Trump is a messianic figure. He's a messiah of Edom, right? And I've talked about that Edom does tshuva, repents at the end of time. I gave a whole shiur about that, you see. So therefore, as a result of that, Trump is one of the most dangerous people to the Satan, because if he does do tshuva, he will help the Jewish people in terms of getting Eretz Yisrael and keeping it and whatever. And therefore, what the Satan has done is he has put a psychotic rage into the American people. That's why this hatred of Trump is not normal. It's called Trump psychosis, or Trump mania, whatever you want to call it. Because the one who's behind it all is satanic, you see, because Trump is one of the most dangerous people to the Satan. Because if he does tshuva, then he will assist the Jews to do tshuva and to get back Eretz Yisrael totally and protect the Jews and so on. I've spoken about this. So that's why we find a tremendous rage against Trump, you see. So the same idea, you see. So that's why the Erev Rav is seen as a critical adjunct, right? A critical aid and abet the Satan. And like I say, they have a credibility, you see. But what is so important about the Erev Rav is that they try to dissuade and get the Jews to reject the Torah itself, not merely to sin. To sin is one thing, but to try to talk them out of their Torah, that's a different level of betrayal. That's why the Erev Rav is so dangerous, because of their credibility and because of their strategy. In any case, this is what we see in terms of the Erev Rav, you see. Now, I've mentioned that at the end of time, right, the Satan needs the Erev Rav to get sparks back, to try to get Jews, to leave, to abandon their Torah. And we have seen in the last couple of years, you see, is that Israel has gotten the Erev Rav. You're talking about Lapid, you're talking about Lieberman, you're talking about Meretz and Labour. All of these people have tried to destroy the Torah and to destroy the Jewish character of the state. Because like I said, because God wants, in the end of time, to satisfy justice, since he is bringing the Mashiach, right, because of the 49 levels of Tumah. So therefore, right, he has given permission for the Erev Rav, right, to rule. Just like he has given permission, right, for the evil of Esav, the Democratic Party, to rule. But hopefully what's happening now in Cheshvan is we now see that the Israeli elections, right, will remove the entire Erev Rav, and these people no longer have the ability, because you don't need them for a coalition. And in many ways, it would appear that this is messianic. So it's a tremendous sign, you see, that when the religious right now is by itself in the government, then they can issue many types of laws which will enormously benefit the Torah world, right? The kollels, the Torah world, the draft, right? They will be able to protect no more Shabbos threats of desecration. Marriage will be good, will be according to Judaism, Torah law, divorce, conversions, right? Kashrus, right, will be legitimate, especially education. There are 1.5 million kids in the public school system in Israel, and it's all under the hands of the Reformed movement. Could you imagine, right, that 1.5 million kids hardly have any type of Jewish education? What an incredible tragedy. But now this is going to be given over to the religious right, which really is incredible, you see. So they can now change the actual education system of Israel to make sure that Jewish youth, will now be instructed in Jewish education. So these ideas are major, because the Erev Rav basically no longer has the domination it had. So it would appear as if the domination or the ability of the Erev Rav to rule and cause so much heartache and agony and destruction to the Torah itself is ending. That is messianic, right? So, we really have to take a look and see what happens now. Because, look, hopefully it could mean that we are now truly, this could be a turnaround, and we now truly see the beginning of the reversal, you see, of the domination of all the evil. And hopefully in America, the exact same thing will happen. We'll know very shortly. In any case, these are very important ideas. The concept of an Erev Rav. Who is the Erev Rav, you see, and what their strategy is, and the difference between an Erev Rav and a person who sins in general, you see, and why the Erev Rav always seems to come and become very strong, when the end is near. And I've gone to these ideas. So certainly let us hope that we are at the end, and therefore the great sign of that is the Erev Rav can no longer have input into laws that will try to destroy the entire Jewish character of the state of Israel, because that's where we're really standing, you see. And hopefully that is the beginning of the turnaround to bring the Mashiach, and certainly the redemption, and hopefully that will mean the end of the Golus, the building of the Beis Hamikdash, and the bringing of the Mashiach himself. Any questions?
So remember, Rabbi, you said previously the 4 R's. I forgot what they were, but it was like rehabilitation. I forgot what it was. When the Mashiach comes, you said there was like 4 R's that it's like the stages of the Mashiach.
I remember something, but I don't recall exactly. You'd have to remind me. I mean, rehabilitation is certainly one of them, Right. Did I say redemption? Or the reversal of the Golus? I don't recall what they were.
I have to look it up.
But this is certainly one of the signs. Because remember, when you take a look at the Gemara, it says that before the Mashiach comes, right, you'll have terrible decrees against the Jews in the world. So the fact that we see that there's a reversal is very important. And we may actually begin to see the rehabilitation of the Jewish people, especially if they could change the educational system in Israel. And it doesn't take that much, really, and that's a very important idea.
When we say rehabilitation, meaning to bring us back to Torah?
Yes.
They don't even know Shema in Israel.
They don't know what?
Shema, a lot of the kids
Right,
don't know.
yeah. Yeah, if you say Shema Yisrael, most kids in Israel cannot complete the sentence. Right? That's how bad the ignorance of education has made them. It's incredible. I mean, could you imagine, if you look at the Torah, right, you'll see that how many times has Moshe Rabbeinu said, and you will observe the mitzvahs, the laws, everything. I mean, he's probably said that 1,000 times. Every other pasuk, verse in the Torah says, and you will observe the commandments of God. He says that over and over and over again, right? And we know that the essential idea, right, is not only the adults, but the youth. So could you imagine in Israel, 1 million kids, 1.5 million kids don't know anything, or hardly anything. Could you imagine Moshe Rabbeinu must be turning over in his grave? That's the extent of ignorance. And I'm not even going into America, right? There are millions of Americans that know nothing about Torah, yet the knowledge of Torah is critical to becoming an observant Jew, you see. So that is a critical part of the redemption, you see, where God has to rehabilitate the Jews, and what that means is to educate the Jewish people in Torah. And that's going to be supernatural. That's going to be supernatural, you see. Although there are ways, actually, to do it in a natural way. I think I once mentioned the concept of learning Mishnayos in depth with a Mishnaic map can actually teach a person the entire oral law in 1 year, right? And that's a natural way. By structuring the entire oral law in such a manner where it's all clear, you see, and that is possible. But how actually God will do that is unknown. But he does say that even if you're, outcast be at the ends of heaven, he says, there I will gather you, which means I will take you, separate you from the goyim. Then it says, Yikochecho, from there I will take you, and that is the rehabilitation of Torah. And then it says, V'heviacho, and he will bring you to Eretz Yisrael. So you see that all of this will occur before the Jews go to Eretz Yisrael, right? And while the Jews are actually in the exile, God will do it. You see, so we don't know how, but hopefully with the end of the ability of the Erev to have an input in Torah against the Torah, hopefully we're witnessing it now in the month of Cheshvan. You see? That's what I've tried to demonstrate.
Rabbi, what do you think about this solar eclipse this tomorrow?
Lunar.
No, lunar.
Lunar.
Well, a lunar eclipse is usually against. It's a bad sign for the Jews. But I had certain thoughts about it. First of all, since a solar eclipse and a lunar eclipse happen in the same month, then the solar will overshadow the lunar. You see, that's number one. The second thing is that maybe the lunar eclipse, which is bad for the Jews, does not refer to the Jewish people, but refers to the Erev. They are Jews. So maybe that lunar eclipse means bad news for a segment of the Jewish people, namely the Erev. That's also possible, you see. So I'm not too worried about it.
Okay, God willing, let Mashiach come already.
Oh, yeah. I guarantee you that he wants to come more than you want him to come. He really wants to come. Because the world deteriorates rapidly. It's hard to believe that the world is deteriorating with such rapidity. It's very hard to believe. And it's not even normal. It's insane. When you look at America, they're insane. You talk about transgender and the immorality, and you have to watch your pronouns. I mean, it's just beyond belief what's going on, And unfortunately, Israel, under the Erev, has also become LGBTQ, and so on, They are following America. Because the idea is, which is interesting, is whenever Israel tries to replicate, right, and be like the Goyim, be like the other nations, it means that they want to become really like the other nations. So therefore they will duplicate an American institution, because that's who they really want to become. They want to become a small America, you see? And that's what it means to overthrow or reject the Torah, you see? So they want to really become a carbon copy of America. That's the whole concept of what the Erev Rav are saying, you see. But thank God, hopefully, that's going to end very shortly.
Rabbi, what happens to the gay and the lesbian Jews once the Mashiach comes? What happens to them? Hopefully they will realize, look, he's going to have incredible abilities, the Mashiach, and it's going to be much greater than Yosef HaTzadik. Mashiach ben Yosef will have tremendous abilities. Many of them are supernatural. So in a certain way, he will be able to hopefully convince the world, because you have to remember, together with the Mashiach ben Yosef also, not only is the beginning of the exile is over, but what it also means is there'll be a tremendous amount, the Beis Hamikdash will come down, which is what I spoke about. And once you have the Beis Hamikdash down, then you have the appearance tremendously of the divine presence, the Shekhinah itself. Look, the whole world is going to be different. We cannot even imagine the type of era, in terms of when the Mashiach comes. Look, I mentioned previously, if you want to understand, what a king and queen are, just take a look at what they did with King and Queen Elizabeth II. It was just beyond belief. The honor, the glory, the type of lifestyle that she had is just beyond belief. The honor that they paid to her. So could you imagine that this is nothing compared to what the Mashiach is going to have and what the Jewish people are going to be able to display? Nothing. And that will go on for hundreds of years until the end, until the year 6000. Right. Now all of this takes time to develop. So I believe that the beginning of the Messianic era will be, perhaps 200 years before the end. Look, it's now 5,783. That means to the year 6,000 is only 217 years to go. So therefore I believe we are really very close, because everything takes time. And therefore the Messianic era hopefully will be certainly over 200 years. And it'll be with incredible glory, far greater than the British royalty. Okay?
Rabbi, you know how when Yaakov Avinu, he told his sons, Rudu, go to...
Say that again, what was that?
You know when Yaakov Avinu told his sons Redu Shama to go down to Egypt?
It was 210 years. You're going to go down.
Right.
Maybe it's going to happen the same thing, that we're going to be redeemed earlier also.
Yes, I believe so.
As well.
Yes. Yes. I believe that the redemption is imminent, because it takes time. The Russian does not want to thrust the redemption on the nations of the world, in a blitz. It'll be too shocking. So therefore he's going to change it slowly, you see, so they can get used to it and begin to live that way. So I hope that it's really starting now, especially with the Israeli elections.
Whatever happens, like Israel is usually the forefront for what will trickle down into the other parts of the world?
Yeah.
You usually look at Israel first to see what's going on to understand.
Right, because remember, the spiritual always comes first, because the decree that allows evil to dominate has to end first, and then that can carry on to the nations of the world. You see, because there has to be a gzera that stops, the goyim and the Erev from dominating, and therefore the Jews go first.